of some of the food safety milestones that have been experienced in the 20 years that the GFSS has been a partnership in agri-food safety. These sessions will take place weekly this month and into the first week of December as well, and they're held from 10:30 to noon. As you've all seen, as you've registered, you can register for one or all of these sessions separately. So please join us as we take a walk down food safety memory lane during this month. So for those of you who may not already be aware, the GFSS is a forum in which to share timely and pertinent food safety topics and includes partners from academia, industry, and government at the provincial and federal level. The GFSS is a partnership which includes the University of Guelph, the Canadian Research Institute of Food Safety, the Department of Food Science, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Canadian Institute of Public Health Inspectors Ontario branch, Health Canada, NSF International, and the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and the Public Health Agency of Canada. So a wealth of partners in this group here. So my name is Emma Famanu. I'm a food scientist at the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And along with Brendan Doherty from the Public Health Agency of Canada, I will be your moderator today. So the topic of this first session today is Nuggets of Wisdom, Introduction of New Rules for Frozen Breaded Chicken Products. So on behalf of myself, Brendan, and the rest of the GFSS organizing committee, again, welcome to this session. I hope you enjoy it today. But before we actually launch into our talks, a few housekeeping rules. I'm sure we've all seen these a million times at virtual events we've been to in the last few years, but just as a reminder, make sure that your cameras and your microphones are off, just so that it's not a distraction for the speakers or for the other attendees. Also, if you have any questions, make sure to use the chat box for asking those questions during the Q&A sections. You can type those questions in at any time during the presentation, but we will wait until the end of each of the talks before those questions are then posed to our speakers for today. There will also be a larger panel discussion at the end where you can pose questions to either of our speakers for today. Also, this session is being recorded. If you would like a copy, you can send an email to Susan Sabatini at the email address that is on the screen. So our first presenter for today is Stephen Parker. Over the last 25 years, Stephen has worked in a variety of public health leadership roles at the local, provincial, and federal government levels, with responsibility for delivering programs and activities dedicated to environmental public health. He is currently responsible for several national public health surveillance systems and research studies related to population health and enteric infectious diseases, with a focus on enteric illness and antimicrobial resistance. Stephen's talk today will be titled Highlights and Reflections of Public Health Interventions Related to Frozen Raw Breaded Chicken Product. Our second speaker for today is Alison Orr. After starting as an inspector with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency 18 years ago, Alison has worked in a variety of roles in food policy and regulation. She is currently responsible for providing technical and scientific expertise in food safety on all food commodities to internal and external stakeholders. Alison's talk today is titled Risk Management Case Study, Frozen Raw Breaded Chicken Products. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so that Stephen can share his. And Stephen, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Can you see the presentation fine?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Great, thank you. First off, thank you for the opportunity to present this retrospective on interventions related to frozen raw breaded chicken products. Hoping through this presentation you can demonstrate how collaboration between laboratory and epidemiology programs helped identify and inform the response to a persistent public health issue across FAC and CFIA. as well as how surveillance and outbreak data have been used to monitor the effectiveness of these interventions over time. Just a couple of notes before I start. This is only going to capture the FAC surveillance and outbreak programs, as well as our connection to the issue with CFIA through Allison's presentation, which will follow mine. That is not in any way meant to diminish the role of the other players who were involved in the issue, particularly Health Canada, our National Microbiology Laboratory, and our public health partners, who were significant players throughout addressing this issue. Also, there'll be some overlap between Allison's presentation and mine, and that's intentional to show that intersection between the public health agency activities as well as CFIA. So frozen raw breaded chicken products. So what do we know about these products? Their name is what they are. These are the nuggets, the frozen chicken patties, the chicken strips. They're a convenient product. I think probably many people on this call, especially if you have young children, have these in your freezer. They are, for the most part, at the time, they are intended to be cooked. But through the course of the investigation, we found quite a great deal of microwaving, as well as what's often common in the household, no internal cook temperature verifications as well. They can be whole meat products, but are often a comminuted meat product. And we know they posed an issue for illness, particularly Salmonella, going back as far as 2003, 2004, when the first articles were published identifying these as a risky food product. So as this is a retrospective, obviously we'll focus on various periods of time as we address the issue over time and then implement interventions and monitor those going forward. So first time period I'll look at is 2003 to 2017. Over this period, we saw human illness trends and prevalence in poultry were consistently rising, with 2017 being one of the highest years recorded. Salmonella enteritidis, which will be the focus of this particular presentation, represents about half of our human illness cases nationally, and that's been consistent not only in this time period, but going forward as well. What we also saw, trends differed by region across the country. Poultry and poultry products were continually identified as a main source of Salmonella illness, again, particularly SE. And frozen raw breaded chicken products were a known risk factor for Salmonella infection. Canada had higher illness and contamination rates in poultry than was observed in the US during this period. You can see for the 2017 up into 2017, at the time, US human illness incidence rates for SC were 2.3 per 100,000 population, whereas in Canada, we were just under 9 per 100,000 population. What else have we seen over this time period? There was an alignment with SC in particular between incidence rates of human illness, percent positive in chicken nugget and chicken breast samples over that period of 2013 to 2017. And this data was collected through our Food Bank Canada surveillance system. And then diving a little bit deeper to understand, well, who was consuming these products? What were some of the risk factors involved? So you can see this first table represents data captured through Food Book, which was a population-based telephone survey that was conducted in all Canadian provinces and territories over a one-year period, with a primary focus on describing what foods Canadians eat over a 7-day period to inform outbreak investigations and response. And you can see when it comes to any chicken, not including deli meats, fairly even spread across all the age groups of consumption. But when it comes to store-bought breaded chicken, much more skewed to the younger age group as far as consumption. So we noted earlier these were identified product for risk of Salmonella infection for a number of years. So diving a little bit deeper to try to understand, well, what did the public know about these products that, for the most part, were raw, intended to be cooked. There was cooked product on the market, but by far the vast majority of it was raw, intended to be cooked. And you can see, as far as knowledge of the risk associated with the food, which was captured through public opinion research done by Health Canada, people really understand the idea, raw chicken, hamburger, raw eggs, these are risky products, they need to be cooked. Whereas at the opposite end of the spectrum, frozen chicken nuggets, those were the products that the general public were least aware of the risk posed by them. So the knowledge was lacking. One of the longest standing challenges related was messaging to the public about the risk of these products. There was insufficient odor and inner packaging labeling that communicated this risk. It was minimal, identified as uncooked, not clearly identified as raw. And I would say the font size, the color of the font used on the labeling these packages was not as prominent as it could be to convey the risk associated. We also saw regional differences through our surveillance work, with BC having the highest Salmonella contamination on farm, and the rates were significantly lower in Ontario than in BC or Alberta, with the Ontario broiler breeder vaccination program at the time most likely helping to explain this difference. However, when it came to frozen raw breaded chicken products, there was less regional difference, and Salmonella contamination rates remained consistent with all the products sampled right across the country. So that lower Ontario rate found on farm and in raw poultry didn't extend to the frozen raw breaded chicken products. So as frozen raw breaded chicken product related illness was still occurring, contamination levels didn't change. An issue with the source and or processing was suspected. So to help move this along further, I think one of the biggest changes that we saw, or biggest successes that we saw, was the introduction of whole genome sequencing in the spring of 2017. WGS provided improved genetic resolution for common Salmonella serotypes compared to traditional molecular subtyping methods. And as a result, there was a significant increase in the number of multi-jurisdictional Salmonella outbreaks detected and investigated. So we still saw the same number of cases, but our ability, that resolution that WGS provided, we were much better at teasing out what were true clusters of illness and helping to identify where the sources those illnesses were occurring. So what you see in this image is when the whole genome sequencing for human isolates came on board. In the same time period, retail isolates from FoodNet Canada started in June of 2017 and farm isolates in July. And we were immediately identifying clusters of retail food samples and farm isolates with cases of human illness. So the availability of these FoodNet Canada food isolates in the whole genome sequencing trees turned out to be extremely helpful for both outbreak detection and response. So what did WGS do for us? Helped inform our hypothesis, helped strengthen our epidemiological assessments, understand the product distribution that we're looking at as well as informing classification and prioritization of the clusters of illness. It's important to note, however, WGS doesn't solve clusters of illness. Case interview data, especially at first interview, is critical to informing how these clusters are investigated and to inform the outbreak response. So what we saw, again, with whole genome sequencing coming on board in 2017, what we saw in the years leading up to it was everything. It was very difficult to tease out not only the different clusters that were occurring, but to identify that an actual outbreak was associated or linking those cases together, and of course the challenge of linking to product. WGS provided increased resolution. For the most part, prior to WGS, our Salmonella PFG clusters would be ongoing for long periods of time and were very large in size. Since WGS, these larger clusters were broken down into smaller clusters and highlighted clusters that we weren't able to see before. Basically, it reduced the noise with increased resolution. So as you can see from this graph, there's one national outbreak associated with frozen raw breaded chicken product prior to the implementation of WGS, and 16 national outbreaks associated with frozen raw breaded chicken products after WGS was implemented, resulting in a large increase in the number of multi-jurisdictional Salmonella clusters for further epidemiological follow-up. And again, the majority of these clusters were in fact multi-jurisdictional. So looking at those clusters of illness and outbreaks a little bit closer, in that period of from May 2017 to May 2018, so that first year of WGS implementation, there were 47 multi-jurisdictional Salmonella clusters that were identified with at least one poultry product isolate. So that was including frozen breaded chicken products as well as raw poultry. But of those 47 multi-jurisdictional clusters, 31 or 66% of them contained at least one frozen raw breaded chicken product isolate. So you can see how disproportionate the illness was, pointing more towards these products compared to raw poultry. We also know for confirmed cases of illness, and in this case, in these clusters, there were over 1,500 laboratory confirmed cases. We know from our burden of illness studies at FAC, for every confirmed case, lab confirmed case of illness, there are approximately 26 cases that go undiagnosed in the community. So the true burden of illness related to these products was estimated around 35,000 undiagnosed cases occurring just in that 1 year period. So what did we learn through our activities? Previous interventions prior to the implementation of WGS, such as the labeling, the packaging, had minimal impact on illness rates. The use of WGS highlighted the burden of illness associated with frozen raw breaded chicken products. As a result, it required a unique management approach beyond simple public health communications saying, cook it, it's raw. Again, the limitations around the effectiveness of the package labeling itself, we needed a different approach. So through the success of integrating both the retail food products along with the human illness cases that we were able to do through whole genome sequencing, we were able to demonstrate a definitive association between the human illness cases and a contaminated product. This increased the attention on the association between Salmonella and frozen raw breaded chicken product exposure in Canada, which led to CFIA's directive on reducing Salmonella below detectable amounts in these products, which Alison will go into much more detail. This directive came out in July of 2018 for implementation by 2019. So looking at changes we've seen since the directive was first issued in 2018, in that year leading up to the implementation by 2019, the number of new cases of WGS, frozen raw breaded chicken product clusters by month. You can see in that first year, 2017, the breakdown of illness was still occurring. There was a notice to industry again in early 2018. Still saw a rise in product. Again, keep in mind these products are frozen. They do have a long life, not only on the shelf, but in homes as well. Finally, in September of 2018, the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health issued a statement on the risk of these products. There was an overarching public health notice regarding the products as well. And you saw a steady decline leading up to the directive, which took effect in April of 2019. So what have we seen with respect to the implementation of these interventions? FAC, human, retail, farm surveillance, and burden of illness studies confirm the interventions were associated with a reduction in human Salmonella incidence rates, a decrease in contamination detected on frozen raw breaded chicken products, as in most cases, the manufacturers, the producers of these products were transitioning to a cooked product, and lower economic and health burden due to non-typhoidal salmonella infections. So this is just an extension of the earlier graph that was shown, where you can see from 2017, we're very much narrowing the gap between the incidence of human illness associated with Salmonella enteritidis in Canada, which is reflected in the red line, compared to the incidence of Salmonella human illness cases in the US, which is represented by the green line. Basically, since 2017, overall, we've seen an almost 60% decrease in Salmonella enteritidis cases in Canada. Our work has been so effective across all of the federal, provincial, territorial partners involved in response to this issue that the United States Department of Agriculture actually reached out to us to find out how did we do what we did, because they were embarking on a policy initiative to declare Salmonella an adulterant in some frozen breaded chicken products, and they wanted to build on the success of what we saw in Canada. So lessons learned out of our activities, I would say first and foremost, leveraging collaboration and shared expertise with public health partners, not only in what we have in the formal outbreak detection, assessment, and response activities, which happen nationally, particularly in multi-jurisdictional events, but our ongoing surveillance activities, communicating across federal departments. And I would add to this collaboration as well, we've had for a number of years a joint government industry working group on the control of Salmonella in poultry, and it's been a very effective table to bring government departments together with industry, present the data, discuss the issues, and to formulate a plan going forward. Having industry at the table with government, looking at the data, discussing what we're seeing in trends has been a very productive environment and contributed to addressing this issue. I'll reiterate it again, WGS doesn't solve clusters. There is a continued importance of our public health partners, particularly in local public health, to do effective, detailed case interview data, especially at first interview. Public health evidence, human, retail, farm data gathered by FAC is used to inform federal food safety policy and regulations set by both Health Canada and CFIA. And that ongoing communication, again, through our collaborations, has proven to be an effective method of controlling a persistent public health issue. Public health communications support Canadians to take informed action. So these public health notices that are distributed, whether it's through local public health or provincial, territorial, or what you see us doing nationally, do have an impact on keeping this issue to the forefront of communicating risk. Multiple sources of evidence and integrated data tells a much more compelling narrative. You saw from 2003 through to 2017, we had data on human illness, but it was really slow in moving the needle on action until we started integrating all of the different sources of data and leveraging the introduction of new technology like whole genome sequencing. And last, and certainly not least, monitoring the effectiveness of interventions and the control measures, not only to demonstrate public health data informing decisions had an impact, but also that it has an ongoing influence and impact on controlling the issue. And with that, I'll pause for questions, but again, want to acknowledge our federal partners on this issue, particularly CFIA and Health Canada, our provincial, territorial, and local public health partners, our industry stakeholders, and FAC colleagues at the National Microbiology Lab and within the Center for Foodborne, Environmental, and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases, and in our surveillance and outbreak management divisions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Stephen, for a great presentation. We'll open it now for a couple minutes of question period before moving on to Allison. So I'll encourage everyone to, if you have any questions specific for Stephen at this time, please put them in the chat and I'd be happy to read them out. Starting off, we do have one from Ophelia, and it's regarding how do you explain the higher rates of Salmonella in Canada compared to the US? I know you mentioned that we have come closer following this intervention, but there is still a difference, and it sounds like the US has not implemented similar interventions. So if they do, are they going to see a similar drop and then we're back to having such a gap? So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, there's different ideas of where this is proving to be a challenge, and I'll go back to this graph here. It varies by province with respect to vaccination programs within the broiler breeder flocks. So you'll notice this particular dip in here. This is usually gets a lot of attention when we discuss this particular graph. So a lot of controls that were put in primarily in BC during this period is what we believe decreased the rate of illness. And this was control programs that were put in on farm in the broiler breeder flocks. Then there was an issue with avian influenza that resulted in depopulation of the flock, and the flocks were repopulated, and we believe they were repopulated with birds that were infected with SE, which drove up the rate at such a sharp incline, and it just stuck there. So that was the primary spread of what where we really started to see a difference between Canada and the US, and we really at the time didn't have a sense of what were the products that were driving this, and I think clearly not only on-farm controls, but also the interventions done by CFIA through their implementation of their directive on frozen and raw-breaded chicken products really helped demonstrate that those products were a significant contributor to illness in Canada. The drop that coincides directly with the 2018 directive, I think really points a lot of evidence towards not only the burden of illness from these products, but the success of that intervention.
Thanks, Stephen. Before I move on to the next question, I do see, Allison, you have your hand up. Do you have something to contribute for this or another question? Feel free to jump in.
I do have something to contribute here. I will touch in my presentation as well a bit about how the US market around these products is slightly different, and we believe that had some role to play as well.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. I'll ask one more and then we'll pass it over to Allison. I think there's a couple others in the chat, but we'll have hopefully plenty of time in our discussion section to get to those. But the next question I'll ask for you, Stephen, is what percentage of raw chicken nuggets in Canadian markets now? Any statistics? I guess the question is, what proportion of chicken nuggets that you would find in the store these days would be raw? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have that data, but I'm hoping perhaps Allison does. I know our retail sampling, because we're continuing to monitor the effectiveness of the intervention by collecting retail samples through FoodNet Canada surveillance, but we were hearing through our sentinel sites it was becoming and has become in the last several years difficult to find raw product on the shelf, regardless of whether it's nuggets, burgers, strips. That so many of them, the producers of these have switched to a cooked product to meet CFIA's directive. So I don't have an exact number, but I certainly know it is significantly lower than what we were seeing prior to 2018.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. So without further ado, I think we'll pass it over to Allison for her presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. So as Stephen already highlighted, there will be some repetition here, but it was difficult not to when we're telling the same story, just two different sides of it, so to speak. As well as Stephen mentioned, what we saw here, where we've come to at this point, is really because of the work that was done in the health portfolio. It was not an effort by just one department or one group. It was really an achievement by PHAC Health Canada and the CFIA working together. So we will go over here a bit about the public health data, identifying the cause of these outbreaks, some of the key events and milestones, the risk management measures, and recent surveillance trends in SC illnesses. I actually only have up to about 2020 data, so you've already seen a little bit more of the story from Stephen's presentation. So again, starting off with some of the analysis of the data that we were seeing overall, Salmonella really has been the leading cause of foodborne illness in Canada for about 10 years, about 20 cases per 100,000 people per year. And about 80% of those illnesses were estimated to be attributed to poultry. Of course, when you have, as Stephen showed, 90% of people reporting that they ate poultry, it can be very difficult to pinpoint the source when you have, consumption data like that. Again, SE is the most commonly reported serovar for Canadians. It's about half of all salmonella-related illnesses. Of course, the severity may vary. While most cases resolve without treatment, others can result in severe dehydration, even death, particularly among vulnerable populations. And, just anecdotally, we definitely saw higher hospitalization rates with SE than we've seen with other types of salmonella. The estimated public health burden per year is 87,500 illnesses, and that's for the salmonella as a whole, whereas Stephen had highlighted what we attributed to the frozen raw breaded chicken products. That includes about 1,000 hospitalizations and 17 deaths with direct annual medical costs of about $17 million. Again, and that really highlights why this is a health portfolio issue, not a PHAC issue or CFIA issue or Health Canada issue. In comparison, rates of Salmonella overall and SE specifically in the US since 2010 have been fairly consistent over time and are lower than rates observed in Canada, as was highlighted before. Again, as brought up before, FoodNet is the sentinel site surveillance system led by PHAC. And this is really a key piece of information or a key government activity that allowed us to solve the cause of these clusters of illness. Again, so you can see here from 2015 to 2018, the proportion of retail frozen raw breaded chicken product samples that were positive for SE ranged from 10 to 14%. So we have the same graph here, I think, as Stephen had. And really, we've highlighted here how WGS is really a key part of solving this issue, being able to link the clinical isolates to the FoodNet sampling It was really a game changer for us in this world. So we had a lot of consumer messaging as we started to see these issues. We started with targeted social media messaging, again, the house portfolio. We also engaged with industry associations, individual companies as well, and they started to highlight the same messages. So this isn't a unique product category where it has the appearance of being cooked, but is still a raw product. So these are often, again, subjected to a non-lethal thermal process. And it gives it that, golden brown, nicely fried look to the surface. And it also helps it retain its shape and overall characteristic of the type of product. So while the risk is the same for any raw chicken products, this category of the frozen raw breaded chicken products pose a unique challenge because of their ready-to-eat appearance. And therefore, the risk that they are handled by consumers as if they were a fully cooked, ready-to-eat product. So consumer handling and preparation practices, product appearance, and labeling issues were identified as essential factors contributing to this problem. So CFIA, Health Canada, and FAC worked together to implement a number of actions aimed at reducing the risk of illness associated with them. So we had an extensive communications campaign to reach as many Canadians as possible through social media ads and posts. We had an overarching public health notice. There was a joint statement by the Council of Chief Medical Officers of Health. There was outreach to media, and we had partner engagement, and we had public notices related to specific outbreaks and recalls. We also started to work on, speeding up our system of recalls or for determining the cause of these outbreaks, as well as our internal health risk assessment process. So we set criteria that allow us to speed up this process a little bit, where we had the recalls where there was a strong epi link to the frozen raw breaded chicken products, that we had a micro link between a specific product and a human case. Again, that was the whole genome sequencing between the food net sampling and the human isolates. And at least 2 of the cases through the interview process report exposure to these products that were manufactured at the same establishment. And we required at least one of the cases reports that the exact lot of the food product that is related to the cases by whole genome sequencing. So we needed those strong links. We needed the epi link, the micro link, and then we needed the case consumption data to link to the exact lot that had been sampled through the food net. And setting these parameters ahead of time really allowed us to speed up that recall process. So in our first outbreaks, the demographic was really the mid to late 20s male. So a lot of the initial messaging was really targeted that these couldn't be cooked in the microwave, that they needed to be fully cooked. You need to follow the cooking instructions. You need to preheat your oven. So it's very targeted at a certain demographic there. The subsequent outbreaks, however, became a little more balanced in terms of male, female, and the average age started to increase as well. Industry and government together started to discuss short, medium, and long-term solutions to avoid having to immediately cook these products. As well, we talked a lot with industry about the product appearance. We talked about whether the product needed this browning, par frying process. We talked about if the appearance of the products appeared more raw, what would we achieve in that way with consumers? Of course, through that process, there was an awareness that really the par frying was necessary for the integrity of these products. Otherwise, essentially, it would be a mess of coating and some raw chicken in the bag. We also talked about how these were being sold at retail. We engaged with groups like the Retail Council of Canada to talk about store brand products, as well as what could be achieved in the store itself? Could we see more separation of products where cooked products were kept separately from raw products in freezer aisles and things like that? Again, that was determined to basically probably not achieve what we wanted to achieve, because as soon as you take that product and take it home, essentially you've lost that separation. Through this process, working with the industry, there was a lot more talk about label changes and what could be added there to convey the message. So industry, through their own initiatives, started to apply cooking and handling instructions to the inner bags, various stickers. They looked at increased font sizes, changing the color and the prominence of the word raw, replaced the words uncooked with a much larger raw statement. Again, through some research, it was determined that raw had more meaning with consumers than staying cooked or uncooked. Again, there were symbols indicating that they should not be microwaved and that these were oven products only. Again, as I mentioned before, in 2015, there was a social media campaign which also highlighted a lot of these same messages. So through a lot of this, industry really worked together themselves to develop a generic inner bag label so that it was consistent across all products, all retailers. And in this part as well, they determined what information should be mandatory, essentially, what everybody should be putting on there, which is, the raw or uncooked statements, do not microwave, cook to an internal temperature of 74, and just the safe handling instructions for raw poultry. Some also decided to include some other information there. In 2016, we actually had no outbreaks or product recalls. By the end of 2016, the majority of industry, about 85%, had switched over to this new inner bag. And again, the inner bag, as opposed to the outer packaging, it was felt there as some people come home and throw away that box and just keep the inner bag. So we would have continuity in the information that was necessary for the consumer. So unfortunately, despite all these inner bag label changes, there were another 23 clusters from mid to the end of 2017, and we had 2 product recalls. So essentially what we said here was, okay, the risk mitigation measure here for these products is first consumer cooking, and second, the information that the food manufacturer is conveying to the consumer. So essentially through the subsequent outbreaks, despite this, all these label changes, we were still seeing it. So therefore, those measures were not meeting the expectations for risk mitigation. At this point, industry as well was, aware that they were losing the ability to keep these products in the market as is. Recalls weren't solving the problem, and industry started to discuss other options as well. In this time, we also learned that the US has very little of this product in retail. Voluntarily, the industry in the US had mostly moved to selling these products cooked at retail after they had struggled with their own outbreaks and recalls. In the US, again, the vast majority of the product that is raw is toward food service, where there is a cook step that should be done after some validation, so to speak. However, they still have some of this product at retail. So moving along, as we're thinking about the effective risk mitigation measures, we were working internally at CFIA on a risk summary on the Salmonella and frozen raw breaded chicken products. So these risk summaries that the CFIA works on essentially takes a look at, all of the product characteristics, the particular hazard that we're looking to control, as well as all of the controls that are currently in place by either the federal government, provincial governments, industry themselves, or, any other body. So essentially what we said after we went all through here was that the current control measures were not effective. And at the same time, we were looking at the implementation of the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, which requires industry to identify hazards and take steps to control them. So at this point, essentially, it was the hazard of Salmonella is currently not being controlled by the measures that were out there. Therefore, alternate measures need to be taken. So again, more work continued to happen with outer packaging as we internally at CFIA were working on this risk summary. And there was also continued conversations about other potential measures that could be taken. So there were investigations of things like processing aid options. And there was some encouraging results at the start, but it couldn't come to this level of below a detectable level for Salmonella in these products. At the same time, we also were moving forward with regulatory changes to require raw to be part of the product name in this particular case, as opposed to a variety of statements that conveyed the message that it was uncooked or needed to be cooked or was raw. So by March of 2018, we really reached a point where we had to implement changes, and it needs to be, done quite quickly. At this point, like I said, 3 new outbreak cases. It couldn't continue. At this point, we released a notice to industry about new requirements to reduce Salmonella to below detectable amounts. So by doing this, there were still options there. Essentially, one option was to cook this product and use a lethality process that was demonstrated to achieve a log reduction and have an end result of Salmonella being below detectable limits with standard lab methods. But there are also other options to test the raw inputs into these products or the finished products, so the finished raw breaded chicken product, that through different processes, industry may have been able to achieve that same below detectable limits. Largely, though, it was felt that fully cooking was the only feasible option for processors, although we know that others did explore various options. And again, this was just for product at retail. There's still a market for frozen raw breaded chicken products going to food service, the hotel, restaurant, institution, etc. As well, we had a 12-month implementation as we knew that this was not an easy changeover for industry. It oftentimes required capital investments, etc. So again, talking about the program management framework, this is really something that CFIA does for a multitude of products or multitude of issues. To look at our system overall to see if we need to change something in a particular area. So Salmonella is quite interesting. Obviously, it's not something that is isolated to being at the manufacturer level. It's really a continuum where it needs to be addressed. And kind of took us to where we were at the end of some public health targets. So some of the key findings were, really that, again, we needed controls throughout the continuum, starting at the hatchery and on farm. And there has been subsequent changes, in the works to hatcheries and feed, etc. The production method of these frozen raw breaded chicken products, specifically that it's comminuted product, it really increases the likelihood that a single contaminated input will contaminate an entire batch of product. So the new requirement, again, as I highlighted, a cooking process, a testing program on the raw chicken mixture, a hold and test program for the finished product, or various processes plus a testing program on the raw chicken mixture. Again, particularly in this case, to allow for developments that happen in processing aids. The intended outcome here, which appears to largely be met, is that the frozen raw breaded chicken products, in government, we live with abbreviations all the time, and it's hard to revert back sometimes. So these products packaged for retail sale has below detectable levels of Salmonella. It applies to all products that have the greatest potential to make Canadians sick when they're consumed undercooked. So this includes products that are made from ground, chops, or formed chicken meat, and products that look like they're already cooked. So it's the par-fried sector. Breaded chicken products that are made from whole pieces of chicken, such as whole chicken breasts, do not have the same high risk. So it did not include the whole intact muscle, the non-par fried, the not for food service, non-turkey, or the turkey products, and stuffed products. At this point, at any time, we could receive enough evidence that these products are increasing in risk or have the same risks. But at this time, we don't have any evidence to suggest that they're presenting the same risk to Canadians as the products that were already included in this. So after we put out this notice and the 1 year to comply, we continue to have outbreaks through the rest of 2018. We knew at this time that processor were already investing in cooking equipment, or were looking at contracting various cooking services to their products. And we also knew that we were going to continue to see potential issues as these products have a long shelf life and were on the market for up to 2 years after. Overall, for the health portfolio, this has been quite a success that we have attempted to use as a model for dealing with other issues similar to this. So prior to the implementation of these new requirements, we had 15 national outbreaks, and post implementation of this, we had 1. And even in that 1, that happened a month after the new requirement was in effect, and the product was produced prior to the implementation. As we dealt with this sector of products, we were also looking at, as the health portfolio, some objectives for Salmonella overall. So in May 2019, the Joint Government Industry Working Group convened an ad hoc technical group to set a public health goal and establish human health illness reduction targets for foodborne Salmonella illness related to poultry and poultry products. So the timeline to reach this goal was 5 years, so by 2024. And this was tracked yearly, and with the idea that at 3-year mark, the target and the timeframe would be reassessed based on how close we were to achieving these targets. In this particular case, it was wildly successful. From 2017 to 2019, there was a 33% decrease in SE incidence. And in 2020, we saw the trend continue to decrease. And from Stephen's presentation, you saw some continuing data which showed quite significant achievements following 2020. So FAC's report on achieving this did highlight the effects of the implementation of the new requirement for the frozen raw breaded chicken products. We also saw some impacts throughout from COVID that are difficult to quantify. Just overall decreases in reporting of cases, whether it was people not seeking the same medical attention for cases of like gastro illness, more eating at home, reallocation of public health testing, etc.
किया यार तुमने ये सब? बट मैंने क्या किया? मैंने तो कुछ
Sorry there, it muted me as well. So really, highlights of this, risk management case study is through public health data, through public health sentinel site testing, the implementation of WGS, and the collaboration in the health portfolio. This sector, the frozen raw breaded chicken products, were identified as, the outbreak cause and a big risk factor for what we're seeing as overall salmonella illness in Canada. We saw that the consumer messaging did not result in significant changes in consumer handling and preparation behavior with Canadians. So we really identified that, as a control measure, consumer cooking or messaging to consumers was not effective. Therefore, industry needed to say, okay, the hazard is salmonella, and I need to develop alternative control measures to control this hazard. And there is where CFIA developed the options to industry and put forth a new requirement with the implementation in 2019. Following the full implementation, we saw that surveillance data showed a dramatic decrease in the number of national outbreak investigations and the number of salmonella illnesses overall. Again, so this new requirement is one of the interventions contributing to this decreasing trend. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Allison, for a great presentation. So we'll start with a couple of questions specific for Allison before moving to a more general panel discussion. So we have one in the chat already from my colleague Matt Hurst, asking if the CFIA risk summary for breaded chicken might be publicly available.
I believe that we had a public-facing version. I will need to double check on that. And for FAC, I would be surprised if you don't have a copy of the risk summary in there already, so I'm sure that we can make that available.
Awesome, thank you very much. Again, invite others to put things in the chat if they have any questions for Allison. I guess one question I have that maybe might shift to more of a broad discussion is, in one of your last slides, you mentioned that the consumer level interventions didn't have the impact that you were hoping to see, but the manufacturer level one does appear to have had great success. With that in mind, would you foresee in other product situations or moving in the future, would you put more focus on making those manufacturing level interventions, or do you think those consumer level interventions are still worthwhile trying out first?
It's so hard when we talk about consumer behavior to lump everything all in together. I think there was a lot of unique factors with this particular product, and certainly the fact that it was par fried and had the appearance of being cooked was a major contributor here. And this is also like a convenience product. So it had, so many factors, and it was also, especially as we started, we spent a lot of time talking about the particular demographic. Being this like early 20s male, and there was even an effort to target our early social media messages, to that demographic and in, video game feeds and things like that. But it's actually, become further work to look overall at consumer behaviors, and how even people's connection with food has changed, or their understanding of where food comes from at different times. I know I've had interesting conversations with my grandmother, for example, who could identify like peritonitis on a chicken, from growing up on a farm versus people who, well, what do you mean we don't grow pineapple in Canada? So it's interesting overall to look at consumer behaviors, and there has been a lot further work in the health portfolio overall with some of that, even starting to look at some of the school campaigns and you know, and teaching children as they're growing up some of those messages. So, you know, to summarize, it's certainly not a blanket approach. I think it's something that was very unique to these particular products, and we would need that uniqueness to suggest that, again, that we need to move controls from the consumer level to the manufacturer level. And they would need, you know, here there was overwhelming evidence that the current controls were not effective at controlling this hazard.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. I'll add that I definitely would have been in that guilty high risk pool. Never cooked it in a microwave, but definitely didn't treat it the same as I would handling raw chicken. So we have a question here as well in the chat about, is encouraging industry to cook an option rather than necessarily having to go to that that directive?
Again, we didn't actually require that industry cook these products. We gave a range of options. What we required was that industry demonstrate that when these products were being sold at retail directly to the consumer, that they were below detectable limits. So there's plenty of room for innovations by industry to, you know, and for, you know, the larger poultry industry as well. You know, there could be a point at which we see achievements happening on farm with feed and with hatchery where, you know, we're seeing such a decrease that industry is able to achieve those below detectable limits through use of, you know, on-farm controls and processing aids, and being able to meet that target. So again, there's plenty of room there for industry to innovate and get to a point where they don't need to cook these products because they're able to achieve that below detectable limits through other means, essentially.
Thanks, Allison. I think at this time we might invite Stephen to join the discussion and open the questions up for more of a broad discussion. I think the one question we have in chat right now might be a good one to get both of your perspectives on. So it comes from Dr. Farber saying, given that there are more illnesses in Canada due to Campylobacter than Salmonella, and many of them are associated with poultry, is government planning on looking at establishing public health objectives for Campy?
So I can field that one. So I mentioned in my presentation, and Allison did this in hers as well, that the joint government industry working group, it's actually titled, we don't have a snappy acronym, unfortunately, but it's the Joint Government Industry Working Group for the Control of Salmonella and Campylobacter in Poultry. I only mentioned the work on Salmonella because that was the primary focus of the group was to tackle Salmonella because we had this persistent problem. We were also of the belief addressing Salmonella would have a spin-off benefit of reducing Campy rates as well because of the close association. We haven't seen the same prominent decrease in Campy that we did see in Salmonella, but it is the next area of work of focus of that group for the foreseeable future will be to look at Campy in particular. And again, our departments, particularly the FAC human health surveillance data, will be relied upon largely to not only inform, you know, the background of what we know as far as rates go, but also any interventions that put into place. It'll be used as the tool to monitor the effectiveness of the interventions.
Anything to add, Allison, or I have a bit of a follow-up question on that one. I guess one question I have is you both mentioned the great boon that moving to whole genome sequencing was for Salmonella. Has there been discussions of doing similar efforts for Campylobacter, and that might help with finding some of those clusters?
Yeah, absolutely. My understanding is that they were looking at validation of WGS or Campy now, but I'm not in the lab, so I can't say for certain.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not really able to provide a lot more on that question either.
Fair enough. If there is happen to be, I know we have colleagues from all across epi lab, government, public health. If anyone has an idea, feel free to chime in the chat with it, as well as if there are any other questions there. In the meantime, I'd be kind of curious, Stephen, if you have thoughts on regarding that, where efforts should be put in terms of interventions, if there is where would you put your focus? Is it all completely across the entire farm to fork continuum to reduce infections, or is there a spot that you think you get the most return on investment for?
I think what we've seen through the work on Salmonella is the multi-pronged approach is necessary. The public health messaging, to Allison's point, the food safety messaging, I should say, it did have limited effectiveness, but it wasn't zero. So there's still a place for consumer food safety messaging. I think we really didn't leverage social media to the extent that that we could. I don't think we were really targeting the audiences that were of the greatest risk. I know Health Canada has some strategies going forward in the short term with food safety messaging, consumer food safety messaging in the next couple of years that will blanketly capture the approach to all food safety issues, not just Salmonella. But yeah, that's a tough question. I would say certainly the shotgun blanket approach would be necessary going forward. And yes, to your point, the farm to fork.
Thanks for that. I'll circle back to a question that was actually asked in the chat earlier, but didn't get a chance to ask, and that was for both of you. Looking back, is there anything you could have done in the past or thinking about doing in the future to stop all these outbreaks at an earlier stage? Kind of that classic hindsight 2020. Would there have been anything that you feel could have been done differently?
You know, like you mentioned, it's always hindsight is 2020, and it's so difficult when you're in these. You don't want to, as things are being implemented, you need to give time to see the effects of their implementation as well. You know, and we had great industry buy-on with this one, where they took it upon themselves to really change the messaging that was appearing, you know, and going with these inner bag labels to ensure that, you know, the critical information wasn't lost once a outer box was removed. You know, so again, you just can't. You can go back and look at what lessons you may have learned from this and what the role of WGS was, maybe, you know, on solving these issues and how we can do better at linking those things together. But we really there were so many things that came together with this particular issue that made it unique. You know, here there was FoodNet surveillance program that captured these products, and that without that FoodNet surveillance, we wouldn't have caught that link through WGS if that hadn't been there. And again, you have the uniqueness in these products of the appearance of being cooked, you know, so and what that meant. So, you know, while we can learn a lot from this, I don't know, even in retrospect, that there's a lot we could have done to speed up the process without, even if we had, we may not have learned as much from this situation, you know, and I don't just mean from government, I mean from industry as well.
I just add to that, so it's not, my comments are not specific to the frozen raw breaded chicken product story. This is more blanket comments for any multi-jurisdictional enteric outbreak. I would say, for the most part, clusters of illness and outbreaks that are multi-jurisdictional don't immediately start as a multi-jurisdictional event. They usually identified, you know, locally within one health unit or within one provincial jurisdiction, and then after a period of time, additional cases are identified in other jurisdictions. So there's that delay, a period of when it's local before it becomes multi-jurisdictional, and the Public Health Agency of Canada takes the lead on the multi-jurisdictional events. So what happens is in that delay, when it becomes multi-jurisdictional, there's a reliance upon that first interview case data that's captured at the local level or at the provincial level. So how good that is done as far as data collected will really influence the success of assessing the cluster and responding to the multi-jurisdictional event. So in retrospect, and again, it's not just frozen raw breaded chicken products, this applies to any outbreak, even going forward, strengthening the talent of local public health in doing that first interview. I think anything that we could do federally to support it. I understand, having worked at the local public health level, I get it. You have many other things on your plate in addition to enteric disease case history follow-up. So whereas federally, from an outbreak response, that is their expertise. This is what they do on a regular basis. So I know there's strategies going forward in offering that expertise to local provincial public health to say, well, this is how we do the case history follow-up when it becomes a multi-jurisdictional event. These are the successes we've had with these different approaches, and essentially providing that degree of training to provincial, territorial, local public health to have that better first interview of the case, which again will not only benefit the multi-jurisdictional events, but for the many events that are localized to a health unit or localized to a province, supporting the ability to do those in a more effective manner, I think is something that retrospectively it would have been even better to have in place, especially pre-WGS, for the issue around frozen raw breaded chicken products. But again, I feel that applies to any enteric disease outbreak, to have the better initial contact and case history follow-up would really makes a difference. We can't just rely on the lab evidence alone. That epi evidence has to be there to dovetail with to support the laboratory evidence.
Awesome. Thank you both for some those great perspectives. I do see a question added here. I believe it's for Allison. You mentioned cooking was the best intervention to mitigate the risk, but you also mentioned that other interventions were explored as well, but did have the same impact. For those who want to investigate more interventions, can you give a couple examples for the unsuccessful ones?
Well, primarily it was look at potential processing aids that could be used, antimicrobial processing aids. Largely, though, what was demonstrated, most of them achieved, I think it was a 2-log reduction at the most. Looking forward, I think at this point it's more of a look forward and what can be achieved as we continue along, like the efforts to reduce salmonella in the whole food continuum. My sense is at this point we're not at a place where there's other interventions that could achieve the level of reduction that we need to see in these products. But I'm hopeful with changes to the hatchery regulations, changes to what is happening in feed, overall management practices, in working with some of the producer associations, that we'll get to a point where it is achievable with some of these things. There's also new technologies all the time. There's moves all the time and looking at how high pressure processing can be used. At this point, we're not there with using that for lethality yet, but who knows where we'll be out in the future. So to say, I don't really have an answer today of what I think is going to work, but I think we'll get to a place where some of these processes can be used to achieve it, coupled with the advances being seen, in other areas along that continuum.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We'll wait for possibly more questions or discussion points to come in through the chat. Maybe I'll open up the floor to you two. Is there anything else? I know that we kind of confined you to those short half-hour windows. Is there anything else that you thought you'd want to share with the broad audience that we have, or a point you'd like to ask your other co-presenter, perhaps?
Well, here in the health portfolio, we can't stay away from each other for very long. So I'm sure it won't be long before we're chatting about some other topic anyway. Yeah. As well as many people on the line I see as well.
I will say, again, certainly you can't look at the epi in isolation without the lab the same way you can't just look at the lab information in isolation without the epi. One of the things that introducing this change in technology, it really changed not only how the epidemiology couples with the lab, which it always has, but certainly in a much more definitive way. But it really brought together the federal departments in the health portfolio in the implementation, along with our lab partners and along with our provincial territorial partners as well. So it was a really challenging first year with WGS implementation, but challenging in a positive way in that there were weekly discussions within the federal family as well as with provincial territorial colleagues around, well, what are the challenges? What do you understand about WGS? What do you not understand? Where can we provide training supports to our colleagues? Where do we need training and upgrading to our own skills as well to understand how this technology will impact our work? So I think it brought us a lot closer together. We were, to Alison's point, we were, at the same table for a number of outbreaks, a number of issues over many, many years. But because technology has changed so rapidly with WGS, I think it brought our work more closely together and had that spin-off benefit beyond cluster assessments, beyond outbreak response, and into the food safety policy world, and making sure we were all on the same page with policy interventions and again monitoring those interventions to make sure it's not just a one-off short-term fix that just bounces back to the way things were, but it's a sustained intervention and sustained improvement.
Yeah, I can definitely echo those sentiments in terms of how it brought all of the players together in working forward to a solution to the problem, not just our roles in particular things. But again, with WGS, we talked about here, its role in the frozen raw breaded chicken products, but it certainly had a role in some of the other files that we worked through. And again, in how we came together to work with this one has had a role in how we worked in others. And I think the romaine lettuce is an example as well, where these outbreaks and the use of WGS really allowed us to identify that there's a recurrent strain that was causing the issue, which again allows us to target a particular area, and came to us identifying, okay, in particular months of the year, there was additional restrictions for that product. So, it's really the same thought process, the same implementation of WGS that allows you to pinpoint something specific about an issue that you would never have had access to before.
The only other thing I would say, Brendan, is anybody who's been involved in food safety for any length of time knows making a policy change has traditionally been a long process of gathering evidence, a lot of briefing. It's the lingo now, it's not evidence-based decision making, it's evidence-informed decision making, where there are many other factors that go into the decision making process, which we all have to accept. But with this particular issue, going from something that we had surveillance data and identified many years, going back to 2003 all the way to 2017, flagging this as an issue. There were gains, but they were really small incremental gains in interventions. So to go from a point where engaging a new technology in 2017, to having a directive come out by CFIA in 2018, be in effect in 2019, and see that immediate impact, that is like light speed for food safety policy interventions and subsequent impact. That just does not happen to that extent in that short period of time. So that's really, I think, demonstrated the power of lab, epi, multi-departmental collaboration, engagement of industry, and hopefully, for any food safety issues that arise in the future, that type of success can be echoed down the road.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's one more question in the chat, and then maybe we'll get to it and then move on to wrapping things up. So the question from the chat, is there a surveillance CFIA Salmonella sampling at retail level for this kind of product?
I actually don't know the answer to that, which I should, but I do know that FAC continues to do their surveillance sampling on these products. Again, as Stephen already mentioned, it became increasingly hard to find any of these products that were raw at retail, although they can be still found, in the food service stream. So if you go to the business Costco, you can find them sometimes. But on the CFIA side, unfortunately, I can't answer that question. Sorry. I should be able to.
Totally all right. So I think I'll just quickly share my screen just so we can wrap up with a couple slides. I definitely want to take this opportunity to thank our presenters today for their really great and informative. Oh, lost there. Sorry about that. But yeah, really want to thank our presenters for their great contributions to today's talk. Really enjoyed it, found it very informative, enjoyed the discussion. Not sure what's happening with my slide deck. But yes, so before we close, do want to make a shout out to our upcoming Guelph Food Safety Symposium sessions. Our next session is on November 22nd, with the topic being "Where's the Beef?" Looking at the virotoxigenic E. coli beef contamination. Then the following week, session 3, the topic is "What's in my smoothie?" looking at the hepatitis A and frozen berry recalls. And then finally, our final session is December 6th, with the topic being "When making a sandwich became a hazard, the Listeria outbreak in deli meats." Very much looking forward to all these presentations and hope you all can join us for that. Big thank you from all of our collaborators, and on behalf of the Guelph Food Safety Symposium Organizing Committee, we'd like to thank everyone. So yeah, I think that's about it, unless there's any final questions coming in. Seeing none at the moment, I think we can call it a close. And yeah, thank you all so much. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks.